My daughter's best friend, Leah, and her daughter, Isla, who may or may not be sitting here today, have a great Rashomon of a story. Because according to the mother, once upon a time the family was vacationing in Hawaii and snorkeling off the beach, and the snorkeling was just amazing. The daughter, who could be headstrong, was feeling moody and refused to join in. Her mother tried being patient and respecting her daughter's boundaries and autonomy, but finally did not want her daughter to miss this extraordinary experience. So she picked her up and put the mask on her and took her into the ocean, and she had her look into the water. And when Isla started to snorkel, she was, of course, enchanted, and she loved it. Well, as the story is told through the other's eyes, on another trip, this lovely daughter was at Disneyland with her family. And at the very exciting Disney character meet and greet, they saw Ariel, the Little Mermaid. And the Little Mermaid asked Isla if she had ever been in the ocean. And Isla told beautiful Ariel, yes. We went to Hawaii, and my mother dragged me into the ocean and shoved my face under the water. Which story isn't true? There is what happened, and there's how you tell what happened. The gifted Irish activist and poet Padraig Ó Tuama worked at Corrymeela, Ireland's oldest peace and reconciliation organization, and he was doing group facilitation and conflict mediation. He wrote in his newsletter last week, "For many years, I worked as poet in residence with Corrymeela. Between sessions, my role was to reflect on what a group had experienced and write a poem for the group's reflection the subsequent week. The poems were not written to be published in journals, but rather as small literary mirrors for the select group of the participants. Sessions would often begin with a reflection on the poem that had emerged from the previous week's session. Sometimes when I'd share the poem, people would have feedback. Edits, I suppose you could call them. One woman said of a poem, and you'll pardon me, it doesn't say the F word enough. And I agreed. I'd written a poem that picked up on some parts of her story, a story of surviving chaos and violence. She needed the syntax to reflect the truth she knew. And he said it remains one of my favorite editorial interventions. Because his poem had reflected her story, but his syntax had not. How you tell your story matters. St. Mary Magdalene has a story. Our chapel, right out here, currently home for a dozen unhoused people for June and July, was dedicated to St. Mary Magdalene. Today we're celebrating her feast day, and we're hearing the Easter reading from the Gospel of John, where the risen Jesus comes to Mary in the garden, calls her name, and she then announces the resurrection to the other apostles. I have seen the Lord. 3 of the 4 Gospels tell of Mary being the first to witness the risen Jesus. It's an extraordinary honor that early Christian tradition actually preserved despite the patriarchal context of the time. It's profound. Mary Magdalene is the apostle to the apostles. She is the beloved one whom Jesus chose to reveal his glory to and trusted her to take the message to the others. She, a woman we call Saint Mary Magdalene. We read the Gospels and we know this story, right? And yet history has named and painted Mary Magdalene not as a saint, but as a sinner and a prostitute. Here at St. Mark's and in many churches now in our era, we've unpacked this weirdness, right, a number of times, of how Pope Gregory in the 6th century conflated the Marys in the gospel and the story of another woman all into one person, and named her prostitute, although the Gospels in the original Greek never actually say prostitute for any of them. Yikes. This was not corrected, so to speak, until modern times, but oh, so quietly corrected. Yet how a story is told matters. We say St. Peter, we say St. Paul, but it is newish to my tongue to say St. Mary Magdalene. But how we tell the story matters. St. Mary Magdalene is the woman whom Jesus healed of 7 demons in the Gospel of Luke. 7 being a number that symbolizes completeness in the Gospels. So whatever was troubling Mary, and we don't know exactly what it was, it truly overwhelmed her life. And in her encounter with Jesus, she was healed and she was transformed. And her life took on a new direction, a follower and a supporter and a beloved disciple of Jesus. One who walked all the way to the cross and to the tomb when the others ran away. The one to whom the risen Jesus came to in her grief and in her despair on Easter morning and transformed her life anew. She became the witness and the proclaimer of the Lord is risen and went forth not just to tell his story, but to live his message. That's how we tell the story of St. Mary Magdalene. And her story is about being transformed 2 times by her encounter with Jesus. And you know what, fellow Christians? That's our story too. How do you tell your story to yourself? Your story with Jesus? When I was growing up, I was taught that I had original sin and that something was wrong with my humanity and my relationship with God. And baptism would wash it away so I could get into heaven. And that's good, if I was good enough. And I always was afraid that I wasn't good enough. That was my story. Until I was transformed by my encounter with Jesus. And by encounter, I wish that I could tell you that Jesus astoundingly appeared to me in a vision, in a glow of light, and said, Nancy, forget that crap. You have always been my beloved. All God's children are my beloved, and nothing can separate anyone from the love of God. But alas, my encounter is not some astounding event, and it rarely is. But it's a normal life of learning and growing and seeking deeper and deeper relationship with the holy, and gradually recognizing in my own heart, in my own quiet experience of the divine within, those things, that we are all God's beloved children, that I need to tell my story as God's child differently to myself so that I can live it more fully into the world. And so do you. Today, we're celebrating the baptism of Zachary Patrick Herman. He is my sweet little grandson. He is the child that my beloved daughter Kelsey yearned for with all her heart. He is the one whose middle name, Patrick, is the name of my departed son. He is the one I have called a bad baby, and you will see it in action shortly, I know. That's because he has a mighty temper. But friends, he may be feisty, but he does not have some kind of original sin. In this church, not because of dogma, but because of Jesus and our experience of divine love, we know that Zachary and every single one of us is born an original blessing. God put you here. Our sacrament of baptism has much traditional language in it, and it does not pretend for a minute that original blessing means that humanity is perfect and without need of strength to keep our hearts turned toward God, and to turn back to God again and again amidst the push and pull of ego and selfishness that's part of being a person. But this human journey does not negate our original blessing. That's how we tell our story as God's beloved children. Not the story I heard and incorporated as a child that I was unworthy, but the story we actually live every day, and how we tell it matters, and it affects how we see and how we treat each other. So how do you tell your story to yourself? On your worst day, do not tell yourself that you are unlovable, that God could never forgive you. God loved you into being because there you are. Don't tell yourself you're unworthy. Jesus died and rose from the dead for love of you. He calls your name gently and urgently in the garden. Be transformed, like St. Mary Magdalene, by your encounter with that divine love. Whether it's quiet or whether it comes with a vision of light, it is a spark within you, within every human being. If you fan that fire in your life will speak that. It will speak that kind of love into a world that desperately needs it in divided and oppressive times, that needs to recognize that everyone, just the way they are, is God's beloved child, called by name, and then to treat each other that way. If your story is original blessing, if your story is love, then you will be able to tell it with how you live and with how you love into the world.